Hi everyone, it's Lucy from My Crazy Craft Life, and I am here with a design team post for Scrapping for Less. Those are the cards that I will be making today, and I was really excited about this one because I got to work with something new. Not new product-wise, but new for me because I never worked with it. Nuvo Embellishment Mousse. And I really liked it. I really enjoyed working with it. For this particular background, I just used a palette knife and a scale stencil that I had in my stash, and that's how I created that background. I did try to make sure that, it was even, and I will say that it dries pretty quickly, so you do want to make sure you're keep your things closed and, don't leave them out and open for a long time. But it cleaned up really, really easily, and there was no problems with that. And then for my next background, I literally just stuck my fingers right into the two little tubs of the embellishment mousse and smeared them all around the cardstock. I think actually these are my favorite backgrounds that I made out of the 6 different ones that I did. I just really liked how they ended up coming out. I used 3 different colors of the mousse. I used Royal Aubergine, Seaspray Green, and Pacific Teal. And like I said, I think they just really came out great. I just really liked working with them. And like I said, it cleaned up so easily. They just came right off. I didn't let it dry on my stencils or on anything, so I mean, it was dry definitely in certain areas, but I really had no issues with them. And then before there, you just saw me stamping them, and now I'm going to color them. And don't worry, I'm not going to leave all the coloring in there. But I use my chameleon markers. I know I do not use them to their full extent with the alcohol and flipping them around. I really like chameleon markers. I like how they blend. I like the tips on them. I do think they fray, but part of that I think is me, the way I color, because I'm kind of tough on markers. But for this one mermaid that I was doing here, when I get to the tail part, I actually Google it while I'm sitting there looking at what a mermaid's tail looks like with the scales, because I wanted to try to do something like that. So what I end up doing is just drawing some scales in with a pencil and then trying to kind of keep that pattern with the markers. And then I end up using a white gel pen to kind of draw in the scales after everything was kind of done and over with. And I really, really liked how that turned out. I thought it ended up being really cute. For my stamping, when I stamp images, and especially when I'm using alcohol markers, I like to use Momento Tuxedo Black ink. I think it holds up to the alcohol markers really well. It doesn't have a lot of bleeding or anything like that. So that's really one of my favorites. So here's another one. It's kind of a wave stencil that I have. And the first one I made, it was the first one that you saw there, was a kind of busy after, and I didn't end up using that one. But this one I decided just to add the 3 colors without moving the stencil around and trying to create all this extra texture, because like I said, it just ended up coming up a little busy for me, at least for these cards that I was making today. Again, after I did it the first time and stuck my finger in there, I really liked, it gets to be really soft and kind of velvety feeling, and it really spreads easily. So I really just liked using my finger just because I could get it exactly where I wanted it, whereas with the palette knife I felt I didn't have as much control. So that is that. Then once the Nuvo Embellishment Mousse backgrounds were completely dry, I took some Mermaid Lagoon Distress Oxide, and just in the white areas of those few, I just kind of put some blue on there just to give them a little more color. And then I just kind of start putting my cards together and kind of figuring out what exactly I want to do. I end up die cutting some sentiments. I die cut happy birthday, thanks, and hello. And then I decided those are the ones that I wanted to put on the front of the cards. And then on the insides, I used some of the sentiments that were included with the stamp sets. That's a piece of cork that I had from, I'm not even sure what I had it from, but it was sitting in my stash, and I said, oh, that'll be a cool sand kind of bed in the bottom of the ocean. And it worked out perfect to be able to put my sentiment on there. I did end up using some vintage photo distress oxide, and I just put a little bit onto the cork piece just to give it a little bit of dimension and a little bit of shadowing. And then there I am. I like to, what do I like to do? I don't know what I like to do. I like to take a black marker and outline, or I guess the side of all of the images, and kind of just, I think it looks finished. I know I've said it lots of times. I watched Jennifer Maguire do it, and I just really like it. So most of the time when I'm using stamped images that are cut out, I do like to do that. And then for the couple different sets, the Mermaids and the Oceans of Joy, they just had obviously lots of sea type creatures and dolphins and whales, and so when I had stamped them all, I just colored a bunch of them. Now I will say, when you're working with the cork, it is kind of funny to work with, and it sounds weird, but it's slippery. So when you're adding stuff to it, you got to kind of be careful and make sure that you let it dry before you start moving it again. For this sentiment, I used the You Are Mermazing, and then I just, because I felt like it had so much dimension with everything else that was on there, I just used some roll tape and popped it onto the card base. That card base is actually one that I had from another Scrapping for Less kit that I had left over, so I ended up using that one. And of course we cannot forget our sparkle, especially when we're dealing with mermaids. So I had to use my sparkle, or my Spectrum Noir Sparkle Pen. And then I had just got these Bow Bunny embellishment dots from Scrapping for Less. They have them over in the store. They were emerald, and green's my favorite color, so I picked them up. And then when I was making this, I was like, oh, because I thought it was really cool with the bubbles, but with the backgrounds I used, I just didn't think the bubbles would really make sense to stamp them on there. But I think that the emerald enamel dots really looked great as bubbles on there. So now this is my second card. I just used some foam strips. I decided I wanted to kind of frame it out, make it look like a picture. So I cut out a frame from a die that I had, a scallop die that I had there, and I cut the frame, and then I cut the background piece with the same frame dies, and then I just took the inside piece of it so that it fit perfectly within the frame. And then there I was just kind of figuring out what I wanted to do. There's where I'm kind of drawing in the scales with the gel pen, and like I said, I really think that that ended up turning out really cute. Now on this, actually on all three cards, I end up putting a shell in the hair. From the shell is actually from the set, the mermaid set, and so I ended up putting the shell in the hair because I just thought that was a cute thing. But when I was making this card, I didn't think about that one until after the fact, so I had to go back and do that one later. So in a couple of the pictures at the end, you'll actually see it doesn't have the shell, but then in the final pictures, it does. So that's what that one is. But this one I used the hello sentiment, and then because it was so thick, that particular stencil, and using the palette knife, it was a really thick stencil, so there is a lot of texture on that. And I used my multi-medium matte because it really adheres well to, especially when you have all different layers like that. And I wanted to make sure that obviously the images didn't fall off. This one I didn't. I was going to use the cork to kind of put a sand thing on, a sandbar, but then I decided against it. I thought with between the frame and everything else that it just kind of worked out well. So this one says hello, and then the inside I just use the sentiment, fish, you were here. I simply adhered those down. I did pop that up with some foam strips, the frame itself, so again that it kind of looked like an actual picture. And again, I have to use my sparkle with our mermaids, so I used the Spectrum Noir Sparkle Pen with those. And then for this one, I ended up using some, have some iridescent sequins that I had in my stash, and I just put those kind of in the same type of look to kind of, I was going for the bubble look. I think the emerald dots ended up looking better, but that I think looked really cute too. So this is the final card that I'm making, and you see I was trying a bunch of different things. I was originally going to cut out a large circle and then put it on there, but then I decided that I was going to use that cork again and end up just making it that way. And this one I was going to use the entire, I made all of these are A2 size cards, and so for this particular background I left it the actual size of an A2 size card, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I used the whale image, which I think he's so cute. This one I was trying, when I colored that mermaid, I was trying to make a pattern with a stencil that I have, but because the image was so small and the stencil, it just didn't work out, so it just looks like it's striped rainbow, which is fine. I mean, it was cute and I liked it, but that just wasn't exactly the look I was going for. But I did end up liking. So here I am outlining all of the images again. A couple things that I would personally suggest. One, when you're coloring so many images like this, is to do light colors. Like if you're doing skin tones and you're doing them all similar skin tones, do all the skin tones first. Or, you know, do that, all of them together, instead of doing one mermaid at a time. Because I know you saw me color the first one, but after that, that's what I did. And it goes much faster when you do that. The other thing I would suggest is to do all of your outlining. If you're going to outline your images, do it all prior to you starting, because sometimes I forget, or I'll have most of them done and then I add something else and I'll have all of them outlined except for one image that I put on a card, and that looks kind of silly. So my suggestion is to try to do it all beforehand so that you don't forget to do it later. This particular one, I wanted to create some dimension on the card, since this was just going to be an A2 size card with the complete background. So I popped up the mermaid. I had the cork, piece of cork that I used there, so that gave it some dimension. But I also ended up popping up some of the other images, like the fish, just to, like I said, give it a little bit of different dimension around there. And then on this one I end up using the bow bunny enamel dots on it as well, to create those little like bubbles that it looks like it's coming up. And I love the little fish that's peeking out of the seagrass. I think those are adorable. So there I am putting the little flower onto that second card that I made. And then of course we got to use our Spectrum Noir or Sparkle Pen to give them some sparkle. And for this sentiment, it's a happy birthday sentiment, and so I was going back and forth on what I was going to use, but then I said wishing you oceans of joy. So that's the sentiment that I used on that one. I also forgot to add the vintage photo Distress Oxide onto the sand for that one, so I had to go back and do that one. But those are the 3 cards that I made today. I also realized that I forgot to say which stamp sets I was using, so I'm using Avery Elle Mermaids and Sunny Studios Oceans of Joy. So those are the 2 stamp sets I used for these cards. I want to thank everyone for joining me today, and I appreciate it. Thank you.